Hey, this is Pete Calandra here, and the following video is the first class of my film scoring class for the fall 2021 semester. So this is up on my YouTube channel, and it's for everyone to watch. There should be chapters in the description box below. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. Thanks so much, and let's get right into it. Hey, everyone. How you doing?
Hello, hello.
Good. I was looking at this a few minutes ago, and we seemed a little light in terms of attendance, but it's looking like we've got a few people here. Still not everybody in the class, but people will show up. Hopefully, it's the first day of class. So anyway, it's good to see everyone. Matthew, I'm sorry about your electrical situation. Oh, it seems to be back on. Is that correct? Great.
Yeah. There was
Danny,
I don't know. We must have
in
blown
Mike's class last semester, I believe. Andy, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good, you too.
And some guests. So Luke Greengold is here. Lee, I haven't met you yet.
Hi, how are you?
And Joseph Aiken is here. Aikens, I'm sorry. Apologize. Plural. All right. So this is a film scoring class for the fall semester. And for those of you who don't know me, most of you do, I am teaching in the music and production section of the Copeland School of Music. And this is my 10th year of teaching at the school as an adjunct, which is like shocking to me that it's gone by so quickly. I'm a working professional composer. And before that, I was a working professional keyboard player in New York City for decades and decades and decades. And in teaching this class, there's no textbook. There's just, I teach you basically what I know. I do that in all of my classes. I think that's better than any textbook because I'm basing it upon my experiences as a professional. And in imparting what I know, part of what I know is what's come up in real life working situations and how to pass that along. And hopefully that will guide people as they navigate through the music industry, which is an incredibly tricky thing to do. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff this semester. I sent out the syllabus this morning, and the syllabus is going to be like a rough guide for the semester. What I did last year when I taught this in the fall was that the students were doing so well that instead of just scoring a film as the final project leading up to it, they actually got to score more than one project. And I'm hopefully that we'll be able to do that this semester as well. And just a couple of things for your own edification. I have my own YouTube channel here, and I will make a playlist, and there will be a screencast of every one of these classes that I'll put up on a playlist here that you can review. If you look at playlists here, you can see that I've got classes from last semester. I've got a bunch of stuff. If you look through here, I've also got stuff from Film Scoring 2020. I've got a film scoring blog. I've got another playlist with just film scoring tips. So I've got a lot of educational videos up on my YouTube site that might be of benefit for you to look at. But this class will be up, and I'll send out a link with the playlist in it as soon as I get it up, usually a day or two after class. So I'm teaching tomorrow at 4:40. If I can get to it in the morning, I'll get it up. If not, definitely on Friday, I'll get it up, and you'll be able to review anything in class. Just a few things. We're going to be working using Google Classroom again this semester. It'll be the last semester that it's available for the class, for school. They're doing away with it for some reason, beyond me. So I did send out an invite to most of you, but some of you don't have a QC account, right? You don't have a QC email address. That's the only ones that can access the Google Classroom. So that's where all the assignments will be. That's where all the class materials will be, and that's where you'll upload your assignments. So please get me your Queens College email address so that I can invite you to Google Class, all right? If you haven't done that. And then the other thing is that I don't accept late assignments, period. So if you don't get the assignments done every week, don't bother handing them in, all right? I got a lot of stuff to do. I don't have time to have 500 late assignments at the end of the semester to try to get everything done. That being said, if there's something that's come up and you're going to be late handing an assignment and you email me in advance to let me know that you will be handing it in, that I will make an exception for. But no communication and no handing in of an assignment, you get a 0 for that right off the bat. In the real world, you want to score films for a living, when a television show or a movie is going to be released on a certain date, you have to be done like 6 weeks in advance with everything. And those timelines are all set. And things happen during a production of a film. I've scored 100 films in my life. And things happen during the production of a film where you have to do extra work, but the timeline, the due date doesn't change. You know, you could be writing a score for a film and you think, oh, I'm on top of this, I'm getting ahead in the game, I'm on time. And then the filmmaker wants you to do some revisions. No problem, I got plenty of time to do that. Then they shoot it up the corporate ladder. It goes to the first set of producers, right? They want changes made to the film. Filmmakers make changes. You have to change the music, it doesn't fit anymore. Sometimes, if I work for ESPN, for example, a film I did last fall, I had to get the filmmaker's approval for my score. The filmmakers handed it in to 2 sets of people at ESPN. They both had to approve it. Then once that was approved, it had to go over to the SEC conference because it was about a college female athlete. And the SEC conference had to approve it. They had comments. It had to be reworked a little bit. And then the college that the athlete went to had to approve it. Right? So that's like 4 or 5 levels of corporate approval. And the deadline doesn't change. And so getting in the habit of getting your projects done and learning how to schedule out your time with equanimity will be incredibly valuable skill. You know, I went to Queens College as an undergraduate and a graduate student, right? And people ask me what the best thing I learned in college was. Well, I had great teachers, right? I had my main guru, Professor Berkowitz. I had Howard Brofsky, who was a great man, great teacher. I studied with Jimmy Heath when he was there. I had Thea Musgrave as a teacher. She was a great composition teacher. I had George Pearl, famous American composer and theoretician. He was an undergraduate theory teacher. I had like some really heavyweights. Carl Schachter, incredible genius with Shankarian analysis. None of that. The most important thing I learned at school was how to get large amounts of work done on time. That was the most valuable skill I learned. All the stuff that I'm teaching you this semester, that I teach in all my classes, I never learned that in a school. I learned that on my own through doing, and the skills I picked up to learn how to get large amounts of work done on time were invaluable to me, not only in getting projects in on time, but also in learning how to figure out this whole new world of technology and how that fits into being a creative artist, right? Because when I started with technology, which is when I was in high school, we had a mini Moog and a 4-track in a practice room, and I started playing around with that. And as I was going to college back then, I was playing in bars 4, 5, 6 nights a week. I had a Rhodes and a synthesizer, and learned how to program synthesizers. Then in the 1980s, I got into MIDI synthesizers when I was working at shows on Broadway and off Broadway, and learned how to start doing home recordings. There was no internet. There was no YouTube at that point. Manuals were translated from Japanese to English horribly. And it was really difficult to figure all this stuff out. When I started programming my first sampler, which was an Ensoniq Mirage, it had an LCD screen that was smaller than the LCD on my air conditioning remote control. And it had 2 digits on it. It use this code called hexadecimal. And, I'm sitting there with this manual. It's like Greek to me. I don't know anything about computer programming, but I had to you figured out all this stuff. So, that's the thing about college that was the most important thing to me. And circling back around to my original statement, got to have your work in on time. It's really important. All right. So I don't really like to go over that and beat it into the ground, but, it's really something that's very, 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 I'm a stickler for. It's very important to me. So, all right. So film music, right? What is film music? Film music is a lot of things. Anybody have any descriptive, adjectival, is that the word? Adjectives that they want to throw out as to what film music is? What does it do? No one? Film music, if I were to sum it up really basically, film music is storytelling, but it's not the main point of the storytelling. It's the foundation with which all of the storytelling in a film is built on top of. Take the music away and see how bad the film is. So music for film is storytelling, and in film, story is king. And that's the most important thing to remember about the creative aspect. The next most important thing, and this will determine your success in the industry more than your skill as a composer, is learning how to navigate the structural hierarchy of a filmmaking team. Learning how to navigate the structural hierarchy of a filmmaking team. So what do I mean by that? Certain arts, and the two that I have spent most of my adult life being involved in, which is theater and film and television, contains a structure. And that structure is like a tree. At the very top is the money people, the producers, filmmakers, and then everything below that. So director, and some directors actually have more power than the producers, depending upon how famous they are and how successful they are, right? But you've got those people at the top, and then below that, you've got film editors, you've got wardrobe people, you've got the director of photography, you've got showrunners, you've got all the crew that do all the setting up, you've got multiple kinds of producers, you've got line producers. These are the people that go out on a day-to-day basis and get permits to shoot things, right? And somewhere down at the bottom of the food rung is the composer. And the composer sometimes isn't even the head of the music area. You have what's called a music supervisor who might be above you. So learning how to navigate this hierarchy and where you fit in with it is oftentimes at least as important, if not more important, than your skills as a composer. Now, obviously, if you don't have skills as a composer, if you can't deliver the goods, that's not a good sign, right? But learning how to navigate and work well in a team, and knowing what your role is in that team and how to get your stuff done. Because, everybody has this idea in their mind that they're going to score a big Hollywood film, and that's probably not going to happen, right? You're probably going to, like the first few films, if you're a Hollywood film composer and you're moderately successful, you write music, you have somebody who prepares your scores, you have somebody who contracts out the orchestra for the live sessions, you have assistants that do all the menial tasks like rendering stems, You have an engineer that mixes the music that you're working on. You've got, you're like almost like a department unto yourself that you're the boss of. And so that you're like a sub-hierarchy in the large hierarchy of the filmmaking team, right? You have a sub-hierarchy under you. Well, no, your first few films are probably going to be student films or independent films where there's either no budget or very little budget, and you have to do everything musically, right? The first 15 films I did, I engineered the live dates. I wrote out, I printed out parts for the musicians. I booked the musicians. I mixed the music. I mastered the music, right? I did all that stuff. And I still do all that stuff, even at the level I'm at now. I do almost everything. And then the only luxury I allow myself now is I get an engineer to come in and do the final mix. But I give the engineer something that's 90% done, 95% done. And then he, the person I work with, my friend Ken, he adds that extra 5 or 10% that doubles the sound quality. So that's, even at today, I do that. And to be honest with you, that's the life of a vast majority of media composers today, is having all sorts of skills, not just composer skills like I can write great music in Sibelius or in Finale or on manuscript paper. No, you're a music producer. You're expected to know how to sequence. You're expected to know how to do mixes. You're expected to know how to write music to picture. You're expected to hand a filmmaker a version of your cue that almost sounds like it's ready to go on air or be released. That's what you're expected to do, So being a composer today is it's really interesting because on one hand, the technical tools that are available to you are so advanced, even compared to 10 years ago. Certainly compared to when I started writing film and music, and certainly light years beyond when I first started recording stuff, that you can, for not that much money, you can have a setup in the big scheme of things where you can produce stuff that sounds like amazing. The downside of that is that's what's expected of you. And in reality, the budgets for film scores really haven't gone up, except if you're in that top level, right? So you're expected to do more work for the same amount of pay that I might have gotten to do a film 15 years ago, and I didn't have to do that as much work at some point, right? So in other words, my demos didn't sound as good 15 years ago as they do now. Now they have to sound like literally almost mixed. I didn't have to do that 15 or 20 years ago, right? But that's what people expect now. So, but at the same time, it's really exciting because you develop your skills, you develop your technique as far as being a music producer. And since all of you, almost all of you, are music students, you've got a leg up on a lot of younger composers, I think, because it's my experience that there are a lot of composers out there trying to make it who have really good production skills, but they've got basically a 7th grade harmonic language and a 5th grade melodic language, and their rhythmic skills are like infantile, and you guys are way above that already since most of you are graduate students. So it gives you a bit of an advantage. And then if you can just learn the technology and get your people skills together, it'll give you a leg up on some other people. But that being said, there are amazingly trained musicians out there that are in this field, and those are your colleagues and competition at the same time. So when I thought any questions on that? Let's see. So it looks like everybody's here now, I think. So what I thought we would do is we would listen to some music and we'd talk about it, and then we'd get into today's lesson. So I quickly put together a little playlist, and I'm not going to play the entirety of this music. So I've got stuff by Bernard Herrmann, John Williams, Danny Elfman, Elmer Bernstein, and some other people. Just let's take a listen and then we'll talk. So I'll play like a minute of each of these cues. And let me know if it's loud enough also. That was Bernard Herrmann, Prelude from Fahrenheit 451. We'll listen to another cue from him. That was from Psycho, and let's listen to another cue from Bernard Herrmann. All right, so that was from Vertigo. Now, let's talk about those three. We'll take those as a subset. Did anybody notice one unifying three different films, right? Fahrenheit 451, Psycho, and Vertigo. Anybody notice something that each one of those cues had?
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah, I don't actually remember everything about the Fahrenheit 451 excerpt, but I remember in the last two, in Psycho and in Vertigo, they both had like these very slow, descending, like legato lines that kind of created like a long and sprawling melody.
Okay, so you're right. You're right in the ballpark. Okay. So that really lines. They're kind of motivic stuff, right? So in let's listen to the prelude. Right. So you got a 2-chord phrase. Ba-dum. Right? And then with Psycho, a 3-note phrase. Right? And then Vertigo. Da-da-da. So again, a 2-note chord phrase. What's important about this for me is something that I call motivic composing. Right? So a lot of film music uses motivic composing. And the benefits of that technique are many. You can take a motive and you can assign it to a character. A motive that's 2 or 3, 4, 5 notes can come in and out really quickly. We're introducing you here to this idea of motivic composing. Motivic composing. All right, very important. I'll be back, bringing it back over and over again throughout the semester. Let's take a listen to some more music. John Williams, even in this particular cue. Like there's all this busy stuff going on in the background, right? Right, do dee da 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 bum. Very simple melody. A lot of little motives in that ascending, the skip there. That's something that could be reworked and developed and brought in and out throughout the whole course of the film in all different manner, with different orchestrations and different, sometimes in major, sometimes in minor, different modes possibly. So it's great for developmental, and that's one of the great things about the motivic composing. Let's just move forward. I want to keep this pace going. This is Danny Elfman. Now, with this one, it's interesting, right? There's not really, until that piano part comes in towards the end, there's no real melodic stuff. It's just a bunch of busyness and craziness and insanity. Let's listen to that one more time. right? You've got that thing in the low mallets there. But aside from that, it's just a bunch of like really wild, crazy embellishments and flourishes. Let's just the soundtrack from Much Ado About Nothing. So this is a longer melody, but notice how there's a lot of little bits in there that he can extract. Dee da ba boo ba. Right? He's got that in there. He's got do da dum. These are all like little individual cells within the larger frame of the melody, and he can extract those and develop those throughout the course of the film. Be ba ba dum, be ba ba dum, and then or bum bum ba dum. You know, like where you place it in the pitch register has a big difference in terms of what the meaning is. Or you could be boo ba dum. You know, if you do symmetric modulation and slow it down or speed it up, you can really do all sorts of cool stuff with it. So even within something that seems to have a longer melody, there are all these little cells inside of that, little hooks that you can extract, and those can become your motives that develop throughout the course of the film. So this is To Kill a Mockingbird, and some of these scores we're going to go over in great detail this semester. Again, you had that piano introduction, then you had the bit in A minor with the descending bass line, and then you had the flute melody coming in when it goes back to a major key. And that all of those things have elements of motivic elements that you can extract and that you can use, and that great composers bring in over and over again throughout the course of a film score. Okay, so the overarching thing about everything we've heard so far, how is this stuff orchestrated? Like, what kind of an ensemble?
Classical orchestra?
Yeah, orchestral. I wouldn't say classical orchestra, but yes, you're right. But I would just say it's orchestral, right? Because the Danny Elfman had those strange kind of marimba-ish kind of sounds, which I don't know if those might have been synthesizers. I'm not quite sure what they were, but overall it was orchestral. And quite a bit of film music is orchestral, but not all film music is orchestral. So let's take a listen to Gustavo Santaolalla. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And this is from the motion picture 21 Grams. And this is completely different. Right? One guitar riff. This is a really successful film score. The whole score isn't like this, but there's a different approach. It worked perfectly for that film. So, Matthew, did you get, I see you've got a question there, right? I answered that for you, right?
Yes, actually, could you tell me which composer that one was? Because sometimes it cuts, like your audio cuts out for me.
Gustavo Santaolalla. The name of the film is 21 Grams, and he did the
Okay,
soundtrack.
thank you.
Yep. All right, so some of you probably know this next one. Okay, so that was the main theme to Halloween by John Carpenter. Completely electronic, completely mechanical, right? And he produced the films, directed the films, and he wrote the score for it. So I guess, it worked for him. Let's listen to something else. This is by a young youngish, he's probably in his 30s now, composer named Olafur Arnalds. Okay, so this is another kind of hybrid music. That opening sound like a processed polysynth of some sort. Got a little distortion, got some delay and some echo on it. Very ambient sounding, almost like a dreamy pipe organ in a sort of way. And then on top of that, he has orchestral sounds. So can anybody, let's take a listen to that. And when the orchestral sounds come in, take a listen and listen to how many instruments there are, and see if you can pick out something about the playing style. All right. Okay, so I'll play that just from before they come in. Anyone venture a guess or make a description? How many? Oh, so what kinds of instruments? What orchestral family?
The strings.
Correct. How many?
Was it 2?
2 or 3.
Correct. 2 or 3. I think it was 2. Could have been 3. And then what did you notice about the playing style? The tones. How were they? They were playing long tones, right?
Arco, legato.
Yeah.
Sort of taking turns, trading off. Like as one finishes, the other one's starting up.
That's true. But listen to the actual timbre, like the bowing style or the fingering style. What's it missing that you normally hear with violins?
Vibrato.
Correct. Right. Good ears, everyone. So again, that kind of playing, I don't know what the scene. This is from a British TV series called Broadchurch, and a lot of TV series have become very cinematic. Actually, it's really interesting how that's happened, but the way that they're playing matches perfectly with the sound of the keyboard, the polysynth that's playing in the background. That works really well. So all these are different kinds of film musics, right? Here's another, something completely different. So that's Randy Newman and the score to Ragtime. And we'll go to the last one I'll play today is by Ry Cooder, who is a guitar player. So Ry Cooder is a great acoustic guitar player, slide guitar player, and that's part of his soundtrack to Paris, Texas. And we'll go over that in more detail. So my basic point here is that you have a preconceived notion possibly that film music is always orchestral music, and a lot of the times there are orchestral elements to it, but it's not always orchestral music. It's what suits the film, what helps to tell the story. That's the correct music. So story is king, and there are many ways to tell a story and to be storytelling with your music. And one of the most important ways for me is learning how to write motivically. That really does help. But again, there are many solutions to a problem, and each film is a unique problem that needs to be solved by the composer to the satisfaction of everybody that's above him in the hierarchy of the film team. How's that? All right. So that's enough of that. So you're getting ready to score your first film, and you get together with the filmmaker, and they've listened to your music and they're blown away by it, and they want to hire you to work on their baby. Does anybody know how to begin? Yeah, Luke, go ahead.
Would you talk about money yet, or is that?
It depends on whether you want to work again or not.
Yeah.
Money has to come up, and that's usually there are some people I work for that I talk about money in the first sentence because they've been not honorable all the time. And there are some people I never talk about money with, and I've never been disappointed by them. That's another skill as a business person, because when you are a film composer, you're running a business that you have to ascertain, whether you can trust somebody or not about money. And I'll talk about that more as the semester goes on. But, you've got a budget. It's acceptable for you. You can score the film. You'll break even, which is probably the best you can hope for when you're just starting out. You get together with the filmmaker. Maybe they've given you the film to watch. You've watched it a few times. You've taken down some notes, and you watch it together. And you do something called a spotting session. And a spotting session is where you and the filmmaker and maybe the producers, and maybe even the film editor, I'm not sure, that it is always a different amount of people depending upon the situation. But the basic gist is that you and the director get together and you create a roadmap. Where each cue starts, where each cue ends, a brief description of what the cue is supposed to do. I find that you'll be dealing with people who are not musicians 99% of the time as composers. And most of you are trained musicians. If you try to have a conversation with them in trained musicians' terms, it's not going to work. Because if you say that I want something adagio, and you write something that's slow but sounds like ragtime, they were probably thinking that you were going to write something that sounded like Barber's adagio, because they don't know what the word adagio really means. They only relate it to a piece of music that they might know. So I find that it's best to skip trying to impress the filmmaker that you know a lot about music theory, and to stick with adjectives that describe the underlying psychology of the scene, each individual scene, and how it relates to the long form arc of the film. So what do I mean by that? Well, here in the beginning, we're setting up the story. So in this first scene, we're in this character's youth. So I want something that sounds optimistic and uplifting, but not over the top. Right? So that's something that you will have to know how to translate into music. Well, right here, it's reflective. He's reflecting back upon something that happened 5 years ago and the lessons that the protagonist, he or she, has learned from that. Well, how do you write a piece of reflective music? What degree of feeling? Is it something like this? Or is reflective 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 something like this? A little optimistic reflective, right? So
It depends who's reflecting, I guess.
right. But what's the correct move? So, these are things that you have to decipher, and I find that it's best to use adjectives. And if the person has something in mind that fits that mood, you'd listen to that piece of music. So your basic thing is that you don't want to get too bogged down in definitions. You want to keep in terms of how you create your spotting notes. You want to keep it simple, right? You don't want to, unless they, like the film The Mission, right? Jeremy Irons' character plays like an oboe, I think. So there's oboe in the film score because it's part of the story on screen. So you might talk, yes, there's going to be oboe here, there's going to be oboe there, but unless they're really, there's something that they're very specific and sure about, you might not even put the kinds of instruments in there. Because you know what an oboe is, but a filmmaker might think it's an English horn, or they might think it's a clarinet. They might not really know, and that's not a criticism of them. That's not their job. That's your job, right? And so, when you're making your spotting notes, you're going to keep things really just need to know, just enough information so that you get the underlying idea of the scene, but not so much definition that it makes you creatively paralyzed, that you can't go forward, right? I got this story that I like to tell sometimes. So for those of you that don't know, I wrote the FIFA World Cup theme for Fox Sports, right? Big gig. 30 million people heard my tune one night in 2016 when the U.S. women won one of their gold cups. It was played in Canada, so it was broadcast in prime time, and my tune was all over the place, right? And it's been on air. They used it for all sorts of stuff. Okay, so when I was contracted out to submit a demo for the gig, I had a conversation with the producer, the music producer, and then I had something else I had to do, and they gave me a couple of weeks to finish a job and then they allowed me to submit my demo. And over that 2 weeks, I was copied on a series of emails from the music producer to the executive vice president of Fox Sports, where they were riffing about what the music should be. And this email chain, literally 2, 3, 4 emails a day for 2 weeks. I had like 50 emails. Oh, it should sound like this. It should have some world music in it, but it should be some rock music. There should be some choir in it, but it should be orchestral. But it's Fox Sports, so it should be epic. I mean, like this whole convoluted amalgamation and oleo of different fragmented and disparate parts of music that made absolutely no sense to any human being. I was getting this fed to me constantly, and I sat down my first free day to write, and I sat there for 3 hours, and I couldn't come up with anything because I was trying to do everything they told me to do all at once. And it was really frustrating, and it was upsetting to me because I wanted to win the gig, and for a lot of reasons. And so, as I often do, and often creative people do this, I stepped away for a couple of minutes, took the dog out for an hour, and over that hour, I didn't think about it. When I got back, I said, you know what? I know what this should be. I'm going to write something and hand it in. I don't care what they said. And I sat there, and over the next 8 hours, I wrote this 2-minute track. I sent some stems off to a friend of mine. She put vocals on it in a couple of spots that I wanted. And I did this demo, full orchestra. I did all the sequencing, and then there was some guitar parts that I played, and I handed it in, and within 30 minutes, it went through the entire food chain and was approved, right? And they were blown away. I didn't do what they asked me to do because there was too much conflicting information, right? I got the gist of what they were saying, and I did it my way, and it worked. Rather than trying to get Shakira and Daughtry and John Williams and I don't know, tabla music. I mean, just try to do all this stuff. What is that? That's like Michigas, it doesn't really work. So that's just a creative technique that I adhere to, where I don't like to talk and think too much about certain aspects of what I'm doing, because it cuts you off from being really creative. When you're creative, you're in the moment, you're doing. You can reflect on things when you're not working and think about it a little bit, but I just like to experience life and let things sort of sink in on a more intuitive level, and it comes out, So when you're making your spotting sheet, spotting notes, you want to just have a sentence or two, not like an epic novel for each particular cue. Okay, so start point, end point, and a little idea. Needs to be organized, and you need to have reference. So organization, naming convention. This is the way I want you to name all your cues in your spotting notes. The first cue, there's 3 numbers. There's 3 digits. There's the first digit, the letter, and the second digit. So Q1M1 means that it's the first cue in the first music cue in the first reel of film. Right? 1M2 would be the first reel of film, the second cue. And you just go through your whole film like that. And this is pretty much standard in the industry. Most composers do this. And so the deal is that film used to be in reels. You get about 10, 12 minutes of film on a reel. And the way you keep track of everything is that this cue goes in the first reel, these cues go in the second reel, and you keep the numbers going sequentially on the last number, but you'd have which reel it's in. Nowadays, if I do a 60-minute documentary for ESPN, it's broken up into acts or chapters, which are analogous to reels, right? So I number up my acts. So if in an hour, you've got about 12 minutes, then there's a commercial break, then another 15 minutes maybe, and then the commercial break. So there's about between 45 and 50 minutes worth of film, and between 10 and 15 minutes worth of advertisement. So you get four or five acts in the hour, and that's how you sort of organize it. So let me show you a couple of ones that were handed in last semester. We have a film that we're going to look at, right? So this person is fine. They only did M1, M2, that's fine. But they've got these numbers here, right? And notice it's just some exclamation, just some descriptions. Julian was a graduate jazz major. This one's a little bit more, I'd say, this is interesting, the way this person did it. Who is this? R.A., I forget who those initials. So they've got this in a spreadsheet, right? They've got the Q. So they didn't do the 1, but they did just M1, which is fine. That works just as well for this particular assignment. And they've titled the piece, which I didn't say to do, but that's good. They've done that. And they've got something called SMPTE start, SMPTE stop, duration, and a description. Right? Now look at these descriptions. Soft intro as if waking up from a deep sleep. Lonely and slight tension. Tension release becomes uplifting. Steady but strong. So you don't see anything about music there. You see the emotion and the background psychology of what's going on. So this is a really good template for how to do it. So what is SMPTE? SMPTE timecode is a set of cooperating standards to label individual frames of video or film with a time code defined by the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. SMPTE timecodes are a set of digits represented by the following formula: hour, minute, second, and frame. Oh, Tay, what did you want to listen to? I just see your question there now. Oh, FIFA. I can play that in another class. I'd have to go find it. I don't have it available right here. So I'm going to pop this in the chat so that you can download that, what SMPTE is. Okay, so what is a film? Technically, a film is a series of still photographs lined up together, one after the other, that give the illusion of continuous action. And the convention is that for every second of footage, there are a certain number of frames in that second. There are there are few standards. The most basic one is 24 frames per second. Right? So every second there are 24 photographs stitched together to create the illusion of a moving picture. 30 frames per second is another one. 24 frames is typically what you see in a movie theater, and 30 frames is typically what you see on the television. There's one caveat, though. There's something called drop frame. So 30 frames per second is not really 30 frames per second. It's 29.97 frames per second. This gets a little confusing, and I'll give you a brief history of it. Television used to be black and white, broadcast over the airwaves, and it was shot at 30 frames per second. Then at some point they discovered they were able to start broadcasting color. And they found that when they broadcast color, something happened in the broadcast that made it come out really snowy, and they couldn't figure out how to broadcast the color accurately. So what they did was they decided to, every minute or so, drop a frame out of the timeline, and that sort of moved things out of phase a little bit, and it solved the problem. I have something written out that I'll read in the future that gives, exact, and you can read it too, which gives you the exact technical explanation of that. But basically, when you hear somebody talk on television that it's 30 frames per second, it's really drop 30 or 29.97. There is not a 0.97 of a frame. It just means that every minute or so, there's 29 frames in a second instead of 30. All right. So let's take a look at this SMPTE bit. Oh, not DIMPTE, SMPTE. Okay, so hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Now, the other thing you need to know is that most of the bits that you'll get will start at 1 hour, right? And that means that it is the first reel. Something that starts at hour 2 is the second reel or the second act. And that's just convention. So if this was the beginning of your film, it would be this would be your SMPTE time code right here, 1 hour. This SMPTE time code here, 1 hour, 12 seconds, and 6 frames, right? So this point, if there's 24 frames in a second, that means that every 12 frames is half a second, and every 6 frames is a quarter of a second. So this is actually, if I were to do this, in decimal points, it would be 12.25 seconds into the film. But that doesn't really, that doesn't fly. We want to do frames. So how does that work? Now, this is the film that you're going to do spotting notes for, right? And this is a little trick. QuickTime Movie, you open it up and you do Command-I, and it gives you all the information about the film. The inspector comes up. So you'll notice that this is the frame rate is 29.97. That means it's at drop, 30 drop it's called. Okay, that's not going to be a problem for us. So this is a film that I scored a long time ago, and I use this for my students every semester because it works well. It's not that long. It'll probably take you like 90 minutes to complete the assignment. So you'll notice here that it's using a semicolon instead of a colon. That's letting you know that it's drop frame, right? As opposed to what I've done here. If I did this like this, whoops. If it looked like that, that's another way that you could tell it's in drop frame, 30 drop. And there is 24 drop as well, but that gets really, really technically confusing. So we're just going to pretend that this is 30 frames a second. That's perfectly fine for this assignment. Don't worry about it. So
April 24th, 2004. Didn't see it coming, didn't hear it coming. When it exploded beside me, that's when everything went quiet. Growing up, I was more of a loner type kid at first. Grew up in one of the city gangs. We had our little run-ins and stuff with police. I used to steal cars and go joyriding. Around my 10th grade year, I really started getting into church and sports, and I got so involved in sports, I didn't have time for the game. So it was like, either you're gonna do one or the other. I was having fun.
Okay. That's the first minute of the film. So your first thing is that where does your first cue start? You have to make these choices. So in other words, what I want you to do is create a spotting notes for this 11-minute film for your assignment for next week. And you're going to imagine that you're talking with a filmmaker, right? You're going to do all of the work yourself. You're going to figure out where each cue starts, where it should end, and write a description as to what you think should work there, right? So the first decision you have to make is, where does the music start? Does it start right at the beginning, or does it start a little later? I know what I think works, but you have to be able to justify what you choose.
April 24th, 2004. Didn't see it coming, didn't hear it coming. When it exploded beside me, that's when everything went white.
Okay, so what I would say for myself personally is that the beginning, there's all that sound design, helicopters, explosions, all sorts of stuff, right? You don't need any music there. So part of being a film composer is knowing when to not have music as well as when there should be music. So where do you start? Well, there's two possibilities as I see it. You could have something that starts here and it's just like maybe a sustained note that comes in, and then right here on this particular issue with those trees, that B-roll on those trees up there, you know, or you could start right there. That's one of two things. Right? So what's happening here? You're getting a sense of where he grew up.
Growing up,
The guy's name is Anthony Smith, where he grew up.
more of a loner type kid at first. Grew up in one of the city gangs. We had our little run-ins and
He's
stuff
talking
with,
about his
police.
childhood,
I
right?
used to steal cars and go joyriding. Around my 10th grade year, I really started getting into church and sports, and I got so involved in sports, I didn't have time for the game. So it was like, either you're gonna do one or the other. I was having fun, and I was having fun and not getting in trouble having fun.
He was in everything from basketball, cross country.
So just a basic thing. Start out that he's a troubled youth, and then he gets involved in sports and church, and he changes his life. Right? So what you might write is that distill that down into like a couple of sentences, right? And you put that into the spotting notes.
Sports and
So where does this cue end, right?
I didn't have
Let's
time
take a listen
for the game.
and a
So
watch.
it was like, either you're gonna do one or the other. I was having fun, and I was having fun and not getting in trouble having fun.
He was in everything from basketball, cross country running, and football. I mean, he done everything. And we was there. Well, I was there. At every game, every track meet, everything.
My mother was a hard worker at that time. She was holding down.
Okay, so right there. So somewhere over here, the first cue could end.
I mean, he done everything. And we was there. Well, I was there. At every game, every track meet, everything.
So somewhere there, the cue could end, and now we're going to talk about his mother in this next bit, right? So this could be your second
My mother was
cue.
a hard worker at that time. She was holding down 2 jobs and working side jobs to make sure we was taken care of. I just had to go everywhere. Everywhere he went, I was going in, just following. Terry took care of it. I mean, when Mama wasn't around, she was like the second mama. So, you know, she took care of us. Just like my brother Michael took care of me because my father wasn't around. Michael was my role model really to everything, you know. It was because of Michael I started playing sports. I actually was going to drop out of college and just Kuwait. He was doing.
Okay, so, right, the first minute or so after the explosions and everything, about him. The next minute or so, about his family. Right? So you can see already that there's there's two little sections there, one that leads into the next. So you would write that down in either a spreadsheet or in something like this is fine too. So let's look at how this person did this one. So cue number 1, M1, right? Duration, 25 seconds. Title, The War. SMPTE. So this person decided to have music on the very first 25 seconds. Description, memories of war, flashback to violence and chaos, remembering the explosion. All right? So what happened was that he got severely injured, damaged, right? He's got some, he lost some limbs. He's got some, I forget what the word is, but some fake limbs that he got replaced. And the next bit, cue number M2, childhood, duration, childhood. So from SMPTE 0, so this one doesn't start at 1 hour. That's a bad job on my part, but that's okay. This starts at 00:00:36:16, and it ends at 00:01:24:08. So that's 48 seconds. Description, reminiscent, change, growing up, and maturing. Then in the next bit, QM3, duration, 57 seconds. Title, Michael, that's his brother. He starts talking about his brother. He's got the SMPTE in point and the SMPTE out point. And then look at the description here, sad but grateful. That works fine. So you see that you just go through the entire film, watch the film a couple of times. It's 11 minutes long. Take some notes and stop it at this point something happens, and just keep it like a running diary of your initial impressions. And then after you've watched it a few times, dive into it and start making out. This is almost like a diary or a roadmap, which will give you the structure of your score, right? It'll tell you where your cues start, where they end, what they're supposed to accomplish. And every film composer does this in some way or another. I don't write these out anymore. I do them right on the timeline of Pro Tools, which is another thing, but I used to do these all the time. And the other thing that's good about having these is this is your contract with your filmmaker. Because after you've written something and they've changed their mind, well, but this is what you said, bro. So it's always good to have things documented.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
So that title means the title of the tracks, or
the name of the cue.
the
Name of the cue. Right. So each individual music bit is called a cue. CUE.
Mm-hmm.
So the title of this cue is called The War. The title of this cue is called Childhood. Right. So if you look at a film, right? If you look at a film score, okay, so this is A Scent and Sensibility by Patrick Doyle. The first cue is Weep You No More Sad Fountains. The second cue is The Dreamer. Third cue is A Particular Sum. Cue 4 is Praying Penniless Woman. So each individual cue or each individual track has its own individual name. Right? But the name of the film is Sense and Sensibility. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it.
Okie doke.
Professor, so this is basically like putting timestamps inside a DAW.
Correct. Right. I want you to learn how to write it out on a document, or you can make a spreadsheet if you know how to do that. But this is what I've got here. This is perfectly acceptable. This is great. This works out just as well. The spreadsheet is really good because then when you want to make a cue sheet later on which is another thing I'll show you how to do eventually, you've got most of it done already. But this is perfectly great. I'll send you guys an email with a link to this film in it that you can download it, all right? I have it all set up in Google Classroom, but I usually do that stuff on my laptop, which is over there. And I thought I had signed in today, but apparently something got changed. in my Google Chrome, which I don't know what that is. So I'll have to explore that. I don't want to take up class time. But this is all written out, and I sent you an invite for Google Classroom. So you should all get that. All right. So are there any questions on that as far as the assignment goes? Just to reiterate, it's written out on the timeline of Google Classroom. You're going to take this film and you're going to create what's called a spotting session. All right. And just so that you are also aware, when you hand in something to me, notice how everybody has it titled the same way. A. Smith, spotting, the date, and your initial, right? So let me do this. I'll put this up on our Google Classroom timeline, but I'll pop it into the... And you put your initials at the end. Those of you that have had class with me before, you know how to do this. I do this in every one of my classes. It's the standard way that I get the students to title stuff. And every assignment, you'll do the same thing. And why is that? I'll show you why. This is the score for a mini-series I did for NBC Peacock last spring, the spring that just happened. And you'll notice that every one of my cues is titled the exact same way, right? The only thing that's different is the number of the cue. So this is the master session. So for this one, I wrote a library of music for the film, and then there were some spots that I scored. So what I did was, instead of using M1 or 1M1, I used the title of the film, the cue number, and the date that I completed it, and my initials with underscores and dashes so that there's no spaces in it. Okay, so this is the film I did a year ago about an athlete named Dara Torres, right? So I've got Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4. So I've got, and this one's a little here we go. So this is Act 2, right? I've got Act 2, M4, D for Dara, Act 2, M5, Act 2, M6, Act 2, M7 with the date. I don't have my initials here, but that's okay for me personally because it's, in my own computer, I'm not sending it anywhere. But when I make a rough mix for my clients, they've all got the same titling. So the reason I do that, I'm very consistent, and I've got a method for labeling things, is because there'll come a time in your career, if you choose to do this, where 2 years after you're done with the project, there might need to be a revision for something that might be getting re-edited to be re-released. And if you can't find it because you don't bother naming things correctly and you don't bother labeling things correctly, that's a problem. So I learned that the hard way about 15 years ago. I was asked to find a cue from something I wrote a few years before that, and I couldn't find it. And those people never hired me again. So that was the first and last time that ever happened. So I came up with a naming and labeling and organizing convention. It's like going to the library. You know how to find things if you know how to use the Dewey Decimal System or whatever it's called nowadays. Everything's labeled and ordered and organized properly. It's really big being organized. It's like one of the biggest things about being a creative artist is being organized. People think of having a sloppy mess is like the hallmark of a great artist, and maybe for some, but cluttered space means cluttered mind. And I like to have my stuff clean and clear and an open space. And as I'm working, if I've got guitars out and microphones out, my room here gets cluttered. But at the end of the day, I put it away and get it clean for the next morning. I can come into a fresh, clean room, and don't have all these things bothering me and getting in my way. And so part of that skill set is getting into the head of being really organized. All right, so I know that it seems a little bit scattered for the first assignment, but does everybody understand what it is? Any questions on that?
I had a quick question.
So,
Yes.
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Okay. Is there like generally a certain amount of time that a cue might want to be, or like, is there too many cues or too little cues, or?
Well, what I would say is that that's an interesting question, because no, there isn't a standard length of cues, right? And there aren't a standard number of cues. The one thing about scoring a film that's really sort of influenced me in all my other music, and I guess it also influenced me because of the way the years I spent playing Broadway on keyboards, is that every project is unique, and every project has its own method of being created. There are things I do technically inside of Pro Tools, because I write in Pro Tools, that I do the same every time. But that's only because at the end of the project, I need to render things a certain way. And I find if I get set up with that stuff first, I don't have to think about that later. I can just concentrate on being creative. But the number of cues is different for every project. The length of cues is different for every project. The length of cues within a project are all different. I mean, if you just take a look at, if we take a look here at some of these film cues. So this is Sense and Sensibility, 3 minutes and 5 seconds, 2:31, 1:15, 1:33, a bunch of stuff in the mid ones, then 2:22. Let me look at a different one. Here, so this is Oliver Arnold's for Broadchurch, right? So this is 3:05, 4:23, 7:06, 3:52, 2:47, 2:41, 1:58, 5:37. So you see, they're all different lengths. This is a short film, so they're probably going to be shorter cues. I'm not sure how many. That's up to you to decide. But that's part of, like, you still have to start thinking about this stuff, right? And getting in the mindset of telling a story. How many cues does this film need? Where does it need to break naturally? What's the flow and the pacing of the narrative? These are things that you have to start becoming sensitive to. Like, you guys have all spent your entire careers as musicians with music as an abstract thing unto itself, unless you've played in a pit of an orchestra, right? For some sort of musical or an opera. Then the music is subservient to the story. And whilst there is programmatic music that is based around a story, that's true. And it also is true that if you're studying how to be a jazz musician, you want to tell your story when you're playing your instrument. It's all still abstract. In film, the film has a certain pacing, right? It's got a certain speed with which the story unfolds, and that speed can change. And let's say, for example, things may start slowly at the beginning of a film, and as you're getting really close to the climax of the film, the rate of change may speed up, and then in the denouement after that, things may relax again. So these are all things that you need to start being, like, just paying attention to and being sensitive with. This one is fairly simple. It's broken down into little sections. It's only like 11 minutes long. There's nothing in great detail, but this will give you a good low-risk practice and an easy first assignment for just getting involved in the semester. The assignments will be getting more difficult as they go on. So that brings me to the other thing, too, and it relates to what I was just saying. The biggest problem I find with musicians that want to learn how to do this is that they don't know the language of music as it works to a narrative. So how do you learn that? Well, you learn that many ways, but one of the ways is you learn that by studying the music of the people that are great at doing it. So the first bunch of assignments are going to be us looking at film scores, listening, watching film clips, discussing. And then your assignment will be to write music based upon what we've done, not to score anything to picture. That comes later. Learning how to write narrative music comes first. Like, for example, if I were to say to you, comedy, you might think something like, right? Something like that. That's funny. But also, this could be funny too. Part of a comedy. Right? That could be part of a comedy. This could be part of a comedy. Right? That could be part of a comedy. So, it's like, what is comedy? Well, what's appropriate for the story? There's many routes, many answers. And the one that works best is the one you should go with. And that takes study and practice to learn what that language is. Drama, like I did before, something like this is, somebody's dying. Right? That's also drama. Very different. Learning all of the language and how to speak it. I improvise these things, right? I've been doing this for decades. And practice, and you get really, you start to, just speak music as a language like that, which is different than learning how to play Donna Lee or Giant Steps in all 12 keys. And so that's an equally valid skill that we all should aspire to be able to do. But that doesn't really work for film scoring. That's a different branch of music. So what I would say to do is just, this is an easy assignment. Just get through it. Take you probably like 90 minutes to do, an hour to 90 minutes to do, and upload it to Google Drive. Please get me your CUNY email address if you have not gotten a invite, and I'll go through my CUNY first. And those of you that that have a different email address written in there, I will remind you, but get me your email address if you don't have a CUNY email address, a Queens College email address. So I think for the first class, that's a lot of information today. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. I spent time yesterday making sure that the new setup would work. And as typical, when it's showtime, things screw up. But that was only for a few minutes. I'll post this video. I'm going to edit out some of those rough parts, and I'll post it within a couple of days, and I'll make a playlist, and I'll send you all a link for that playlist in case you want to review this stuff. So are there any questions? So we're probably every week going to go to like 9:45, 9:50 or so. Typically, if we were to do this live, there'd be a break in the middle, but I don't find breaks work well in Zoom because people just leave and they don't come back. So.
When do you want the...
Go ahead. It's
you
fine.
go this time.
Go ahead. It's fine.
I was just gonna say, when do you generally want the assignments turned in the night before or the same day?
I won't look the day like if next Wednesday.
Just before class?
Well, no, I'll look at it Thursday morning probably. So get it in at some point Wednesday is fine.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be before class. Has to be like when I download everything the next day. Okay, so it was that.
Professor, and can we talk for a minute because I can't be here from next week, so I have something to discuss with you. So.
Is this Yunji?
I mean, yes.
Okay. You can't be here next week. So the good thing is that, thank you for letting me know. The good thing is that next week's class, I will videotape it and put it on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it. Do you understand?
Yeah. Yes, I got it.
Okay.
But I mean, from the next week, I mean, the whole semester, I already emailed you before the starting this semester. So maybe can you give me just one,
yes.
for a minute?
No problem. Yeah, no problem. All right. So are there any more questions?
Yeah, Professor, can I chat with you for a couple minutes after class as well?
Yeah. So the both of you hang around and we'll chat. So so that brings us to an end of the first class, and we will pick this up again next week. And hopefully it'll go a little bit smoother. It wasn't too bad for a first class of the semester online. You know, it's teaching online sucks, but this class actually will end up being better online than it is in person. And for the simple reason that I've got a lot of stuff in my computer that I can access and use here that I can't get working on the school's computers for a lot of reasons. So, you know, this one particular class actually is better online than it is in person. So you can definitely rest assured of that. All right, everyone. So I'll stay around. I'm going to stop recording this now. Thank you. And I will hang around for the two of you that want to ask some questions, but that will not be up on the internet. All right. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll catch you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.